The incident began with a spark, followed by a loud pop, and a scream from across the fence, the kind that could make you think Karen, my rather demanding neighbor, had lost a cherished possession. In reality, it was her son's ATV charger that had caught fire. Given her audacity, it was only a matter of time this would happen. You see, you don't simply siphon electricity from an engineer's home without repercussions, especially after being forewarned. Karen had dismissed my concerns, brushing them aside with a carefree comment, "It's just a little power, relax." Well, I certainly made sure her backyard wasn't feeling just a little power anymore, amping up her ATV to the degree of a household appliance. But let me roll back the story to when it all started, the moment where karma began plotting its course. It didn't begin with that dazzling blaze. It commenced with an odd reading on my home energy monitor. As a qualified systems engineer specializing in power infrastructures for data centers, noticing such details is second nature. My passion for electricity meant I was quick to spot unusual energy drains on my solar inverter during off-peak hours, something most wouldn't detect. Living in a serene neighborhood, where residents often boast about their gardening and composting skills, I prefer solitude sans community drama. Nevertheless, I noticed an anomaly every night between 1 and 3 a.m., a 1.8 kilowatt-hour consumption that didn't align with any household devices, neither HVAC nor hot tub nor battery cycling. Something external was amiss, and that was when the suspicion towards Karen emerged. Karen, a woman with extravagant sunglasses, a voice loud as a foghorn, and an apparent disregard for boundaries, moved into our neighborhood following a contentious divorce 2 years ago. With her arrival came a slew of inconvenient choices, days filled with wine-fueled brunches and unpunished HOA infractions. Her latest indulgence was her son's modified electric ATV, noisy, bothersome, and reliant on electricity. While tending to my hedges one day, I discovered an orange extension cord snaking its way over the fence, originating from her yard and mysteriously vanishing behind my tool shed. Bewildered, I initially dismissed the notion as impossible. After all, I was under the impression there weren't outlets outdoors in that area. Nonetheless, I resolved to turn off every exterior breaker aside from one to investigate further. The following morning proved my suspicion correct. Logs displayed a power dip at precisely 2:12 a.m. The cord vanished with stealth but not before capturing evidence with photos. I decided a civil confrontation was in order, assuming it might have been an innocent mistake or her son inadvertently used my outlet. When I rang her doorbell the next day, she greeted me wearing yoga attire, obscured by sunglasses, and clutching a mimosa like a brunch sovereign. I mentioned the unexplained power usage and inquired whether anyone from her household might have accessed my outlet. She blinked, offered a smile, and casually explained that it seemed insignificant, merely a temporary measure pending repairs on their garage panel. The suggestion that it was trivial because I utilized solar energy was frustrating. Her nonchalance disregarded ethical principles and basic permission. Attempting to explain that this constituted theft did little to sway her. She dismissed me by patting my arm, insisting I relax as though it was harmless, akin to charging a car battery. I exited swiftly, conscious of not letting my temper take the lead, but my mind was already devising a plan. Upon contacting the HOA to report the issue, I received unexpected feedback. A letter warning me against hostility and alleged unauthorized modifications near shared property lines. Karen's claims painted me as a person threatening safety with electrified hazards. False accusations that left me awestruck but determined not to play their game anymore. Despite favoring peaceful resolutions, Karen's actions meant venturing into familiar territory, the congruence of electricity and justice, a lesson she had inadvertently sparked into reality. She was unaware of my expertise in crafting fail-safe systems, the kind that power high-grade military servers. She didn't know about the time I constructed an independent backup grid for a hospital using only surplus parts and a considerable amount of caffeine, and she certainly had no idea that she was on the verge of transforming her late-night escapade into a very costly pyrotechnic display. That evening, I began to draft my plan, designing a deceiving socket, an irresistible bait. It would be connected to a perfectly legal, impeccably safe, yet entirely destructive surprise designed to ruin her adapter without posing a danger to anyone. It needed to be discreet, invisible, and deeply personal since it wasn't just electricity that she took, it was an affront to my craft. I set up the fake socket on my side of the fence, carefully angled to appear overlooked, as though left casually attached to a shed's junction box. It was made to look enticing, unguarded, live, and easy. However, it was tied to a precisely calibrated impedance circuit that would burn out any charger drawing over 3 amps, perfectly harmless to domestic appliances, but an absolute snare for an ATV charger. The trap was set and I awaited my moment. 3 nights later the cord appeared once more, coiled and plugged in. I observed from my workshop, leisurely sipping tea at 2:17 a.m. The circuit performed brilliantly. There was an intense blue flash, a sharp pop, followed by the infamous screech, Karen's, piercing through the night like a tone-deaf vocalist stuck in a blender. Her son darted out clad in only his boxers, trying to comprehend why his prized ATV had become a smoke-spewing display reminiscent of Halloween. I'd never grinned so widely, but that was merely the beginning. Karen believed she could pilfer from an engineer without repercussions, yet what she'd fried was trivial compared to what followed when the Homeowners Association (HOA) got involved again, making one critical error: supporting her, declaring war in essence. The morning after Karen's power surge spectacular was unforgettable. Her stomping filled the air, slippers thudding as though she were orchestrating sabotage, her loud complaints accompanying calls to the fire marshal. From behind my kitchen window, fresh coffee in hand, I savored the theatrics. The cord had vanished again, the ATV concealed beneath a tarp, resembling a crime scene, while Karen animatedly recounted, via phone, how her offspring had nearly fallen victim to potentially lethal electricity. Of course, there was no real danger, merely a fried adapter unit and a lesson in karmic justice. The act was not over. Karen hadn't grasped the lesson, and by midday I had a visitor. A man wearing khakis and a golf shirt, clipboard in hand, face smug with presumed authority. "You cannot set up unauthorized electrical devices along a shared boundary," were his opening words. Introduction seemed redundant. Karen had returned to the HOA, aiding them in reprimanding me for installations supposedly hazardous to community safety. I maintained my composure as he recited bylaws, most seemingly more tied to Karen's imaginative rulebook interpretations than genuine electrical concerns. I clarified everything. The outlet was within my property, legally installed and compliant with current regulations. Yet, unbeknownst to him and withheld in conversation, was the fact it was primed with a non-lethal surge induction loop, triggering upon exceeding certain current levels. Safe for humans, pets, and even the occasionally bemused squirrel, but indeed catastrophic for delicate electronics. He scripted notes onto his clipboard, muttered about further investigation, and declined my offer of a cookie. It was clear, this was far from resolved. In fact, Karen was likely to intensify her actions. That's the pattern for those with entitlement, they escalate. Thus, I too had to elevate my response, not in pettiness but with precision. She wished to engage in games? Fine, I would participate. However, I wouldn't idly wait for another incident to cross my boundary. I needed immediate awareness, so I returned to my design table and tapped into my forte: crafting intelligent solutions. First, the decoy outlet received an upgrade. The original circuit had already proved effective, but I aimed for instant feedback. Hence, implementing a concealed data logger connected to my home server, masqueraded within an old garden gnome. Whenever something plugged in, it would timestamp the event, gauge the voltage draw, and alert me. When my phone hit the designated limit, the socket emitted a precisely timed voltage spike, not enough to ignite anything but certainly enough to disable any charging circuit. I conducted thorough tests on an old leaf blower twice. Following this, I set up motion-triggered cameras disguised as birdhouses and floodlights, repurposing equipment from an incomplete security upgrade in my garage. One camera pointed at the faux outlet, another monitored Karen's yard where her ATV was usually parked, and a third captured the view along the shared fence line. All camera feeds were streamed to my server and backed up to the cloud. Should Karen approach the outlet, I'd have solid evidence. The masterstroke was the dummy extension lead. I draped it over my own fence, artfully arranged to appear neglected after yard chores. It seemed operational, connected to the fake outlet, yet the wiring passed through a surge-trip circuit hidden beneath my flower bed. Should Karen or her offspring decide to yank and reuse the cord, they would be in for another surprise. 3 quiet nights passed, during which I hoped she might have learned her lesson. But on the 4th night, at precisely 1:42 a.m., my phone buzzed, power draw detected, rising beyond 2.7 kilowatt-hours, followed by a surge threshold alert. I pulled up the live feed and watched as a bright flash illuminated the birdhouse camera. The extension cord jerked, the charger sparked, and the ATV emitted a soft wheezy sigh seemingly resigned to its fate. Karen's son, bewildered and without a shirt, leapt back like a startled deer, fumbling hurriedly to unplug the cord. Smoke rose from the charger, not as dramatic as before but enough to emphasize the point. I leaned back, smiling, The system had performed flawlessly. By morning, the cord vanished once again, but the damage had been repeated, and I had time-stamped geotagged video evidence. Determined not to wait for the HOA to impose another pointless fine, I printed a collection of screenshots and strode into their office. The attendant, Janice, I believed, glanced through them with widening eyes and a grimace that steadily deepened. "Are you telling me she used your outlet without consent?" she queried. "Twice," I confirmed, presenting my logs and footage. "Check Section 8B of the bylaws, unauthorized utility access." Janice pursed her lips, recognizing the rule, though aware of Karen's connections with a couple of board members, making this less straightforward. "We'll need to conduct a review," she stated. "Meanwhile, I suggest removing outdoor outlets to prevent escalation." "Janice," I replied, leaning closer, "this is an HOA that penalizes mailbox color discrepancies while ignoring Karen's illegal power hookup across properties. I've been patient, quiet, but if you don't enforce the rules, I'll go to the city utility board and lodge a theft complaint." Her response was a hesitant blink. "Your move," I uttered before leaving. That evening, Karen confronted me, irate and sans her customary mimosa and shades. She demanded to know what I'd done to her ATV. I feigned ignorance. She claimed her son was traumatized, to which I suggested he might stop pilfering electricity. She threatened legal action, and I countered with evidence, logs, and an engineering degree saying otherwise. Then I handed her a USB stick. "What's this?" she asked. "Everything needed to realize you've chosen the wrong neighbor," I replied, closing the door gently. Karen didn't knock again, but I understood she would retaliate. She always did. However, I was prepared, armed not only with a surge circuit but also with truth, law, and community support. It turned out Karen had been stealing from others, and once everyone was aware, the real storm would commence. 3 days post-USB delivery, the social fireworks ignited, not the literal ones seen with her smoking ATV charger, but the societal upheaval kind. Karen was about to face the true consequence of her actions. She clearly didn't understand my subtle warning. Rather than retreat, she proceeded with the kind of audacity only a true suburban tyrant could muster. That morning, a police car arrived at my residence. The officer was courteous yet assertive, noting that Karen had lodged a complaint asserting that I had installed a hazardous electrical device that endangered her family. I questioned whether she had also mentioned her family had used my outlet on private property without consent. Security footage was available to prove this. The officer seemed surprised and admitted she hadn't shared that detail. I invited him inside, showed him the footage of Karen's son connecting the cord, with time-stamped logs revealing power drain after their first attempt had failed. I also displayed the outlet schematics, which were up to code and designed to shut off under high loads, safe for people, troublesome for those attempting theft. The officer leaned back, clearly impressed. "You're not joking," he commented. "No, sir," I replied, "but they are, and they've involved the law in their antics." He assessed the situation, remarking that Karen's claims seemed baseless and akin to utility theft. He assured me that his report would reflect this and that such complaints typically lose traction once formalized. I expressed my gratitude, and as he departed, I noticed Karen across the street, arms crossed, sunglasses on, sipping yet another iced latte. She glared at my house, evidently hoping for confrontation, but I refused to engage. My plans were much larger than a petty face-off. The saga took another twist the following day with the arrival of an official letter, emblazoned with a gold seal as if it were from a regal court rather than a band of retirees with idle time. It accused me of breaching Section 12A regarding unauthorized electrical setups posing community hazards, accompanied by a $500 fine, and demanded an inspection. Furious, I responded with my complaint, supported by photos, logs, videos, and a comprehensive technical explanation. I also included the city's building inspector and local energy board, determined to involve legitimate authorities. Unexpectedly, neighbors began approaching, starting with Tom and his outdoor kitchen, followed by Nancy, known for her friendly waves, and the Patel family, who operated a catering venture from home. They inquired about odd occurrences like fridges flickering or motion lights resetting. The mention of Karen's interest in outdoor outlets resonated with me. Had they experienced similar outages? Tom affirmed, noting his fridge lost chill overnight, Nancy's garden lights flickered in the early hours, and the Patels mentioned their freezer had thawed unexpectedly due to a breaker trip. It dawned on us that Karen hadn't confined her thievery to my property, she had orchestrated widespread theft throughout the block. We convened, shared coffee, and I demonstrated my monitoring system. The revelation of Karen's son sneaking in to plug the charger left them astounded. Tom laughed heartily, acknowledging the audacity of Karen's exploits. We formed a collective chat called Shock by Karen, which quickly amassed members, 23 by nightfall. Karen had been pilfering electricity from half the neighborhood for months, exploiting unlocked outlets, garden ports, and even absconded into one resident's RV hookup during their holiday absence. Finally armed with evidence, each neighbor took measures to secure their external sites, adding lockboxes and covers. Together, we equipped Tom with a smart monitor, and Nancy enlisted my help to set up a decoy cord. It was no longer about revenge, it became a quest for neighborhood justice. We weren't just dismantling the theft, we were confronting the arrogance and deceit that had gone unchecked for too long. Karen always seemed to believe that the rules didn't quite apply to her, until the monthly HOA meeting at the clubhouse took a dramatic turn. Usually a mundane affair filled with discussions about the permissible height of flower beds and patio color guidelines, this meeting was anything but ordinary. Attendees arrived equipped with USB sticks, screenshots, and time logs. As each member presented their findings, Karen, sitting in the front row with arms crossed and jaw set, resembled a cat caught in a dog park. She attempted to argue her innocence, claiming exaggeration, hearsay, and jealousy from others. Even Greg, the usually supportive HOA president and once her ally, appeared uneasy in his chair, unable to disregard the evidence, including the police report I handed him neatly packaged in a manila folder. The tipping point was a neighbor's power bill, which revealed a sudden spike in usage coinciding with Karen's acquisition of an ATV. Another neighbor cross-referenced this with breaker log date stamps. Everything aligned perfectly. We had constructed an irrefutable case based on solid data. In desperation, Karen accused us of harassment and declared her right to use community electricity because of high HOA dues, a claim that suggested private property was communal. That misstep incited uproar. Even Greg could offer no defense. The board swiftly voted to suspend her HOA privileges pending a thorough investigation. Discussions of fines and even a restraining order ensued. In anger, Karen stormed out, nearly toppling the refreshment table. But the revelations weren't finished. Unbeknownst to all, the stolen electricity wasn't just fueling her ATV, it was powering lavish backyard parties complete with light rigs, mini fridges, and a karaoke machine, all illicitly charged through neighbors' outlets. Her backyard had operated as a parasite-fueled nightclub, and I had the footage to prove it. What began as a mere neighborhood disturbance transformed into a significant case of strategic utility theft with wider implications. This necessitated a detailed technical investigation involving historical energy usage audits, metadata analysis, and an extensive review of surveillance footage. With complaints pouring in from multiple residents, it became clear Karen's actions were not isolated to occasional power siphoning but were systematic exploitations of others' resources. I, along with other residents obtaining explicit consent, installed additional smart monitoring devices on affected properties. The synchronized data showed a clear pattern of energy surges corresponding with the covert use of external charging equipment, often under the cover of darkness. Timestamps matched footage of Karen's teenage son frequently moving between properties on the pretext of retrieving balls or yard work. Further analysis of power phase fluctuations revealed transient voltage drops on the neighborhood's shared grid, inconsistent with normal household consumption. These were indicative of high-demand devices like electric vehicle chargers or industrial appliances being improperly used, qualifying not just as a civil violation but potentially a criminal misuse of public utility systems. Upon compiling this analysis, I submitted my findings to a city energy auditor. The auditor confirmed the report's validity, indicating that what began as neighborly theft could now be classified as third-party utility fraud under municipal law. Unauthorized and unmetered electricity usage could, if exceeding a certain limit, lead to criminal charges and restitution orders. This was pertinent as Karen's patterns of misuse spanned several properties and the cumulative impact exceeded 3,000 kilowatt-hours over 4 months. In addition to technical evidence, testimonies from local residents further confirmed the misuse, with accounts of mysterious extension cords sprawled across lawns and unexplained lights left burning in outside structures. Throughout the neighborhood, unexplained electrical disturbances became a frequent topic of discussion. One vivid example came from a neighbor perplexed by their smart sprinkler system, which inexplicably switched off during Karen's late-night gatherings. Logs substantiated these events, correlating brownouts with her parties. These accounts contributed persuasive, circumstantial evidence to an expanding dossier during this period. I undertook a comprehensive analysis of Karen's party scene, leveraging drone footage and examining luminance values from various security cameras. Through these methods, I pinpointed the lighting and audio devices she was powering, discovering that the aggregate energy consumption of her string lights, bass amplifiers, drink coolers and portable karaoke equipment exceeded 2.2 kilowatt-hours, far more than incidental use. Astonishingly, this energy draw was conveyed through unauthorized connections, with extension cords weaving across fences, beneath hedgerows, and even modified through irrigation control boxes without consent. Armed with substantial evidence, I collaborated with 2 affected neighbors, formally petitioning the City Utility Board to execute a comprehensive audit of local energy allocation. Concurrently, a private solicitor for one of the families began drafting a civil suit for damages. The multi-pronged strategy aimed to compel Karen to offer financial compensation, involve law enforcement for potential criminal charges, and prompt the Homeowners Association to revise its bylaws for clearer definitions of utility theft and enforcement protocols. Karen, either oblivious or intentionally dismissive of the rising consequences, continued to act as though the community's systematic response was merely a coordinated personal vendetta, often expressing this sentiment in overheard exchanges, likening herself to a victim of surveillance and collective tyranny. Despite her dramatic protests outside the clubhouse, her rhetoric failed to undermine the solid data amassed against her. Recognizing the threat to its reputation, the HOA convened an urgent meeting to address the issue, deviating from its previous attitude of benign neglect. Swiftly, they stripped Karen of all subcommittee roles, rescinded her communal privileges, and issued a notice requiring the removal of all unauthorized electrical wiring over property boundaries. The administrative measures gave way to an even more consequential development. Karen received a certified letter from the Energy Authority, informing her of an investigation for meter tampering and utility theft under City Code 4.3.7. The letter included a request for a home inspection, which she ignored, prompting a subpoena as per municipal procedures. As news of the investigation spread, the neighborhood's sentiments morphed from frustration to vindication, with many neighbors finally feeling validated as rational organization resulted in tangible outcomes. Residents untouched by Karen's actions also began voicing dissatisfaction with her ongoing self-entitlement and disregard for community norms. The concluding accountability phase revealed a substantial financial imposition. The utility company's assessment showed an energy debt exceeding £1,800, compounded by HOA fines, legal costs, and property infringement penalties. Karen faced a significant financial obligation, not merely a trivial neighborless squabble. The official documentation surpassed 60 pages, encompassing full resolution images, legal definitions, comparative energy assessments, and a community impact summary. Despite being confronted with compelling evidence, Karen offered no apology or acceptance of responsibility, resorting instead to denial. However, such denial failed as a defense, revealing her underestimation of her neighbor's ability to respond not with emotional reactions, but with precise documentation and strategic cooperation. The repercussions were concrete, enforceable, and supported by institutional authority. Reflecting upon the final report, what resonated most was how effortlessly this situation could have been circumvented had Karen simply initiated an informal discussion or made a neighborly request. Unchecked entitlement morphs into delusion, which in this instance was dismantled methodically, one data point at a time. In the weeks following Karen's dramatic fall from grace, the neighborhood experienced a newfound sense of camaraderie, where genuine smiles and cheerful waves replaced previous tensions. A weary glance at the group chat revealed its evolution from a support thread against theft into a hub for garden tips, local events, and an occasional meme. Through Karen's disruption, we found ourselves unexpectedly united. A neighborhood once quietly disconnected now engaged in conversation. Having disconnected our common adversary, Karen was not faring well with this newfound reality. Silence had settled over her once chaotic backyard, the ATV, formerly a symbol of mischief and rebellion, rumored to have been sold to cover her mounting restitution charges and legal expenses following the utility company's investigation. The karaoke machine, twinkling lights, and suspiciously potent outdoor speakers had all vanished. Gone were the boisterous Friday night festivities that transformed our streets into a makeshift Coachella, replaced by the odd presence of garden gnomes scattered across her lawn, seemingly an attempt to recast herself as an innocuous and quirky neighbor rather than a power-stealing nuisance. Her son, once self-appointed royalty of the cul-de-sac, had been reassigned to garden duties. His lawn mowing, rubbish collecting, and driveway weeding, whether punishment or a bid to restore goodwill, indicated his ATV days were definitively over. He avoided eye contact, his signature sneer dulled to a subdued shuffle, confronting the reality that some transgressions bear consequences far greater than imagined. Meanwhile, our homeowners association underwent a transformation of its own. The meeting that exposed Karen's misdeeds provoked several board members to resign or face removal. Fresh elections were held and, remarkably, garnered genuine community involvement. Residents previously indifferent to rules and votes participated eagerly, equipped with clipboards and fresh ideas. A former firefighter named Gwen emerged as the newly elected president, promptly drafting a revised charter that explicitly prohibited utility theft, authorized random complaint inspections, and imposed automatic fines for electrical tampering. It also established boundaries for power setups near property lines and mandated inspection tags for all outdoor systems. Although invited to join the Safety and Infrastructure Subcommittee, I gracefully declined, opting instead for occasional advisory support. Gwen, acknowledging my disinterest in the political limelight, valued my commitment to restoring neighborhood tranquility. With new regulations in place, many residents took the opportunity to upgrade their electrical systems. I assisted several neighbors in installing tamper-proof outdoor outlets and taught others to track their usage with straightforward tools. Jokes about starting a business arose. Shockguard, one neighbor suggested. Though amusing, the notion of turning this experience into something productive secretly appealed to me. Karen's final defeat materialized not as an eviction from her home, but from her illusions. The city penalized her for utility theft, the HOA fined her for repeated infractions, and the community that she once held dominion over now actively evaded her. Isolated and disgraced, she clung desperately to her former persona. On a mild spring afternoon, while many of us busied ourselves with garden tasks, Karen emerged trailing a long squeaky hose. She swaggered to the center of her lawn as if she still owned the street, spraying her flower beds while loudly humming an inaudible tune. Her oversized sunglasses and garishly pink tracksuit, clearly designed for attention, failed to elicit any interest. Conversations carried on, rakes continued scraping, lawnmowers droned on unabated. A few days later she attempted again, brandishing an old battery-powered speaker to blare music across her yard. A handful of heads turned and the group chat noted, Karen testing the airwaves again, yet no one responded. Her efforts to incite chaos faltered without electricity, and we thoroughly meant that literally. As the weeks passed, my camera checks dwindled and my dummy outlet remained unperturbed. My logs showed no signs of tampering. Though contemplating removal of the monitoring system, something within felt right about keeping it. A badge not of conflict but of vigilance, symbolizing the strength of principled individuals standing firm against recurring disrespect, even when concealed behind a facade. One morning as I was fine-tuning my solar array, the quiet was interrupted by a voice from behind. Turning around, I saw Karen at the boundary of my property, looking weary and unguarded, without her usual sunglasses or pretense. "What brings you here?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. She paused before admitting, "I suppose I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical yet intrigued. "For what exactly?" I replied, laying out the options. The theft, the deceit, the false police report, or the melodrama with the homeowners association. She blinked, visibly taken aback by my candor. "All of it," she murmured, sounding genuinely regretful. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Clearing her throat, she confessed, "I didn't realize how serious it was. I thought it was harmless." "No harm ever comes from taking what isn't yours," I said, "and especially not when it's done over and over." She nodded, showing some understanding. We both lingered in silence for a moment before she added, rather awkwardly, "I just wanted to say that." With that, she departed, her footsteps lighter and slower than usual. I didn't forgive her on the spot, nor did I entirely believe her sincerity. Yet perhaps this was a beginning, a hint that she might finally grasp that her actions were draining more than just energy. Later, as the sun began its descent behind the rooftops, I sat on my porch with a steaming cup of tea, observing the orange-hued sky. The world seemed still, and for the first time in ages, I felt true tranquility. Gone were the disruptive ATV sounds, missing cables, or erratic monitor spikes. There was only quietude and the gentle rustle of leaves. Neighbors strolled by, waving, and a child pedaled past on an ordinary bicycle, not an overpowered electric contraption. I smiled at the scene. Peace, it appears, isn't something to await but rather something to craft. Carefully assembled, guarded with vigilance, and if someone threatens to take it away, you make sure they remember the cost.